Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. It's almost spring, so I've decided to inspire you with a holiday layout. I'm working with a sketch and designing a more mature, masculine Easter layout for the Scrap the Boys challenge. I bet you're wondering about that phrase, mature or masculine Easter theme. Our boys are 20-somethings, which means that those typical pastels and fluffy bunnies don't always work for Easter photos. Here are a few that I'm going to be using today of our son dyeing Easter eggs, and they have some more muted colors to them. So I'm going to give this page a Boho color palette with softer muted colors. The sketch I'm using is part of the March Scrap the Boys challenge. This sketch is available on their blog and social media sites for you to use. It has 6 photos, some tags, tabs, and florals, and very bright colors, which makes it a good inspiration piece for spring. Everyone is welcome to join that challenge. I'll add a link for you in the description below with the list of supplies I'm using on this project today. The background pattern for this page is a soft plaid. In the center, I've placed a piece of tan colored paper with some stitching around it. This pattern stitching was created with my sewing machine. I need a bit of a border around the edge to break up the pattern a bit, so I'm going to bring in some vines that I cut with a die. These are a lovely sage color that matches the patterns in the background, and it's going to be a color that I use on the layout. The die I used is a slimline die, which made it just shy of the 9 inches that I needed, but the design worked out just fine around the sides of this paper. I did not add adhesive to every one of these leaves. Instead, I just added a little glue to a few of the leaves so that they would stay in place as I tucked them under the cardstock. Then I went back and tacked a few of them down to make sure that the border didn't slide out of place. If you wanted more dimension, you could add another layer of leaves with some foam dots, or cut apart a few of the vines and add some layers in front or behind the borders in a few places. Now that the border has been tacked down, I'm going to refer to the sketch for the layout of my photos. This sketch shows the journaling below the lower left photo, but I was lucky enough to just snag the few photos that I did that day, so I'll make one of these photo spots a place for my story. It's still going to be backed in blue cardstock so that it fits the rest of the page design. I'm going to bring in some tags and pattern papers to tuck behind the photos. There will be some florals in here to match the spring theme, but they're a more muted color that matches the background patterns. I'm also going to be using a terracotta color, a soft peach, and some green patterns. Here in a moment, I'm going to make some flowers in those same colors so that all the elements start to pull together. It took me a moment to get everything aligned with a T-ruler. Grid layouts usually set my OCD into overdrive. I always end up taking way too much time aligning all the pieces when I could be creating. The T-ruler definitely helps with this. I did also pop up quite a few of the photos on some foam tape because I knew that I would be tucking other elements behind them, and I wanted to have a variety of dimension on this page. Now that the main part of the page is complete, I'm going to create a few floral pieces. I have already cut these out from mixed media paper using a die, and I'm going to shade them with some watercolor paints. I want the colors to match the patterns that I have on the page, so I brought over a piece of pattern paper to help me mix my watercolor paints. I have already laid these die cuts into little bundles on my mat. These are the layers for each flower, and by placing them next to each other on this mat, the coloring is going to go a little bit quicker. This mat is also a grippy mat that holds the items in place, and it's going to make cleanup a breeze. Now, I'm no way a watercolor expert, I usually just mix and mix the colors until I get the hue that I'm looking for. If the color seems too intense, I add more water or some of the white. If it needs to be darker, I add gray or a darker shade like blue or brown. Watercolors always become lighter as they dry. So if you're trying to match the color in your pattern paper, you're going to want to create a little darker shade. I am leaving some of the areas white because I find that watercolor pieces look much better with a little white showing through. Sometimes I'm in a hurry and I don't want to take the time to color individual pieces, so I just swish a bunch of watercolor paint onto a sheet of mixed media paper. Then I dry it with a heat tool and cut out the florals from that cardstock. Those usually have more of a haphazard look to them, and the colors always vary, but they still look lovely, and it takes less time than painting them individually. When I add color to leaves, I always use multiple colors of green or blue-green. I find that using leaves in a variety of colors on my projects builds contrast on the page. All right, I'm going to finish the rest of these off camera, let them dry, and then I'll show you how I assembled the rest of the layout. Off camera, I did assemble those flowers and now they're ready to go. These turned out so pretty, didn't they? Now I'm going to take a look at the sketch one more time, and this is going to help me determine where to place a few of the items. The sketch shows stars, hearts, flowers, and some phrases. Now, I'm not going to add all of those to my page, but I do like using phrases, so I'm going to start with those. I'm going to place a tab near the top photo. On this tab, I'm going to add a green phrase that says, "Love this day." On the center photo, I'm going to bring in more of that terracotta rose color and place another tab that says, "Today." Then I'll finish off that arrangement of color with another phrase. So now I have 3 terracotta colored items on here. Let's bring in some more green to match that green phrase at the top. I like how the sketch shows a phrase that's the same color as the tag on the right, so I'm going to replicate that. I'm going to bring in a 3rd dark green item with the title. The sketch shows a 5th phrase on a circle in the corner. And I like having odd numbers, so I'm going to bring in a little yellow flag. Now that some of the phrases and colors are in place, I'm going to add those florals. I did fuss around a bit trying to determine where these needed to go. I knew that I wanted to create some visual triangles on the page, but I didn't want this to be too flower heavy because it's supposed to be more of a boyish page. Florals on a boy layout are not a bad thing, especially if the theme is something like spring or Easter or a wedding. But I felt like they needed to fit with the flow of the page and not be the focus of the layout. I like the visual triangle being formed with the yellow flag and 2 of the yellow florals, so I'm going to leave those. I like the softer colors for spring and what they add, but I'm thinking that maybe less is going to be best, and I may throw in a few white florals to offset some of the colors. So I went ahead and shut off the camera so that I could get an idea of where I wanted everything to go, and now that I've figured that out, I'm going to adhere everything in place. While I do, I would love it if you tapped that subscribe button and let me know in the comments that you're a new subscriber. If you've visited here before, go ahead and let me know in the comments how you feel about this color palette for Easter, and let me know if you enjoyed this video by tapping that thumbs up icon. I attempted to add a flower near the title, but it felt a bit out of place. I decided just to stick with 3 clusters of flowers and not place anything near that title or the tab. Now I am going to start building my title. This is going to say, "You're not too old, remember this." I wanted these to have a little dimension, so I cut 3 of each letter and adhered them together to make the letters a little thicker. The words "you're not" are going to be added with some terracotta colored letter stickers to match some of the other elements in that color. You're going to see that I started out by laying them horizontally, and then I realized they weren't going to fit the space, so towards the end I decided to move them. This title was chosen because it fits the story behind the photos. These were taken Easter of 2020, and as many of you experienced, that was not a typical holiday. We had two 20-somethings at home that year, and they were, well, bored out of their mind. Our daughter suggested that they dye Easter eggs, which is something we hadn't done in many years. We did end up with some Nintendo and Star Wars eggs and interesting color combinations. But it was a wonderful memory of our time together during that year. All right, so my title is all laid out and finished. I'm going to add a little subtitle that says, "Remember This." And this is in the same color as those smaller sticker letters. And then I'm going to bring in a little butterfly in the same color to just finish off this area. Off camera, I added some enamel dots to the flowers to bring in some more blue. I also added some ribbon, twine, and a brad to those tags in neutral tones. At the base of the page, I added the story onto that 6th square, which is a great place to add a story. When we look at the sketch, you can see that I kept pretty close to the original. I didn't use the bright colors, but I was inspired by the spring vibes, so I created my own version of a spring layout for a 20-something boy. I'm going to share some close-ups of this layout so that you can see everything in a little more detail. Today's layout was inspired by the Scrap the Boy March Challenge sketch, and I chose to create an Easter layout with a more mature masculine feel. There are some flowers on this page to give it a spring theme, but I kept those to a minimum with some muted colors, neutral tones, and softer elements. If you're one who enjoys pinning photos to inspiration boards, I have added still shots of this layout to my website and galleries. I want to thank you once again for joining me as I created another scrapbook layout and shared this memory with you. If you have any questions about the project or supplies listed below, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.